It was the kind of winter afternoon that looked like it had been painted from memory. Soft snow still clung to every fence post, breath rising like prayers into the quiet sky, and the orange windows of St. Mary's casting a gentle glow across the frozen sidewalk. If you ask anyone in Winfield what they remember most about that Sunday in 2012, they won't mention the weather. They'll remember the last time they saw Eliza Monroe, 12 years old, walking home from church with a smile so big it barely fit her face. She never made it back, not across the street, not down the little alley where the kids sometimes cut through to reach Maple Avenue, not to her mother's waiting arms at the kitchen door. That walk, a walk she'd taken a dozen times, simply ended, just like that, as if someone had reached down from the sky and scooped her off the earth. They searched. Of course they searched. Winfield might have been a small town, but it had a big heart. Police, volunteers, church members, even people who barely knew the Monroes. They all gathered that night, flashlights and gloved hands, calling her name until their voices cracked from the cold. But the only thing they found was silence. That silence lasted for 11 years, until one Tuesday morning in late February during a renovation at the old church. A worker pried open a warped floorboard in the East Prayer Room. Beneath the dust and rot was something small, soft, and heartbreakingly familiar. A rainbow-colored glove, frayed at the fingertips, crusted with old earth and unmistakably Eliza's. But we're not there yet, not yet. If we're going to understand how it all happened, what really happened, we need to go back to the very beginning, before the snow, before the silence, before the lie, back to when everything still looked normal. Back to Eliza. Eliza Monroe was the kind of girl people described as sunshine, not just because of her smile, but because she lit up any room she walked into. She was chatty in a way that was never annoying, always kind, a little too curious. For her own good, and loved asking questions, most adults didn't have the time to answer. Her favorite snack was cinnamon toast. Her favorite person was her mom, and the only time she ever really argued with anyone was when her little cousin Mason called her mittens baby gloves. Those gloves, the rainbow-striped ones, were the only thing she'd asked for that Christmas. Her mom had found them at a church bazaar, handmade by one of the women who knitted for winter drives. They were too big, but Eliza wore them anyway, stretching her fingers into the ends like it was all part of the fun. That Sunday started like most others. Church at 10C, a big breakfast beforehand. Her mom stayed home because of a migraine, but Eliza had insisted on going anyway. She liked Father Connolly's sermons, even if she didn't understand half of them. And she had promised her best friend Paige that she'd bring the drawing they'd been working on for the Sunday school board. She walked out the door around 9:40. By 10:10 she'd been seen entering St. Mary's. By 11:05 she'd vanished. In the beginning there was hope that she'd gotten distracted, that she'd stopped by Paige's or wandered off chasing one of the neighborhood cats. But as the sun sank lower and the snow began to harden beneath boots and wheels and tires, that hope began to curdle into something else. Police were called. By 3:09 p.m., a formal search had begun. By sundown, the entire neighborhood had turned out. That first week blurred into itself. News vans showed up, hovering like vultures. Her photo, smiling wide in that yellow coat, was taped to gas station doors, school hallways, and even stapled to telephone poles that stood frozen in place. Everyone in town had some kind of theory. An old man who lived near the trail behind the church claimed he heard a scream. A woman 3 streets down swore she saw a yellow coat turn the corner near the railroad tracks. But nothing ever came of it. The one thing no one could explain was how nothing had been found. No footprints leading away, no discarded items, no signs of struggle. It was like the earth had swallowed her whole. By spring, Winfield moved on, at least on the surface. Kids still walked to school. Church services resumed. Eliza's photo faded under the sun. Her mother, Marie, never gave up. She kept her daughter's room the same, kept her jacket hanging by the door, kept the gloves, well, gloves singular, in her purse. The other had been misplaced weeks before Eliza vanished, which Marie would later swear was some kind of omen. There's something strange that happens in small towns when something awful takes root. People stop making eye contact. They talk around the thing, pretend it's not sitting in the room with them. After all, what do you say to a mother whose child was stolen by thin air? By the time the third year rolled around, only 2 people still actively talked about the case. Marie Monroe and Eliza's uncle Darren. He was Marie's older brother, a bit of a loner, kept mostly to himself, worked maintenance at the local mill, and helped out at the church whenever they needed heavy lifting or small repairs. He wasn't close to Eliza, not in the traditional sense, but he always brought her old coins from his flea market trips and showed her how to shine pennies with vinegar. After Eliza vanished, Darren made it a point to stop by Marie's every Sunday. He'd bring groceries, shovel the walk, sit with her in silence. Some folks called it sweet. Others said grief can bring even the quiet ones closer to home. But nothing else happened. No more clues, no new leads. Eliza was gone, and time did what it always does, moved forward like it owed no one an explanation. Until the glove. Grief is a strange kind of gravity. It doesn't just pull at your heart, it rearranges everything around you, the furniture, the conversations, the way you breathe in a room that used to feel like home. For Marie Monroe, time had split in half. The day Eliza disappeared, before and after, there was no middle. She tried to keep working, tried to keep answering the door, tried to keep attending Sunday services at St. Mary's, but every smile felt borrowed, and every sermon sounded like it was missing a verse. Eventually, she stopped going. She couldn't stand walking into the same pew where Eliza used to sit, swinging her legs in rhythm with the hymns. Instead, she started spending more time alone. At first, it was just afternoons, then days, then weeks. She'd sit by the window with her daughter's old coat folded on her lap like it was holding a heartbeat. The only people she still spoke to regularly were the detective and Darren, her brother. Darren never asked questions, never said things like, "You need to move on," or "Maybe it's time to let go." He just showed up, fixed the sink when it leaked, replaced the porch bulb when it burned out. Once during a particularly brutal January storm, she opened the door and found him quietly shoveling her entire driveway before she'd even gotten dressed. He never rang the bell. He just did what needed doing. Winfield's new police chief came in during the 4th year, young, clean-shaven and clearly out of his depth when it came to cold cases. He reviewed Eliza's file like he was flipping through a high school yearbook, promised Marie a fresh look, assigned a junior officer to re-interview some of the early witnesses, but nothing changed. The town had stopped watching and Marie was too exhausted to push. Then came the whispers, not malicious, just tired. Maybe she ran away. Kids do strange things. Maybe she was taken somewhere far. Maybe she's safe, just doesn't remember. Marie hated every version because they all avoided the truth she felt in her bones. Someone took her, and that someone had likely watched her, knew her, lived in Winfield. That was the part no one wanted to say out loud. One night in late autumn, Marie sat on her porch sipping tea when Darren arrived. He wasn't carrying groceries this time, or tools, just a cardboard box. He set it down gently at her feet and didn't say a word. She looked up. "What's this?" He gave a shrug. "Things from Mum's attic. Found them while cleaning out the corner." Their mother had passed 2 years prior, and neither sibling had fully unpacked the belongings left behind. Inside were old photographs, one of Eliza as a baby, chewing on a teething ring with more determination than teeth, another of Marie holding her as a toddler, face glowing with the chaos of young motherhood. There was even a drawing Eliza had made in 1st grade, a crooked house with stick figures and a sun that looked like it was doing jumping jacks. Marie smiled, then cried, then smiled again. Darren just sat beside her, elbows on his knees, eyes forward. After a long while, he said, "I always thought she was the bravest kid I ever met." Marie turned. "Eliza?" "Yeah, that time she broke. Her wrist on the playground, remember? Didn't even cry till after the hospital. Tough little thing." "She hated needles," Marie said softly. "Told the nurse she'd rather fight a bear." Darren chuckled. "Sounds about right. That was one of the last nights she remembered sleeping through till morning. Elsewhere the world turned. Paige, Eliza's best friend, grew up and left town for college. The school repainted the gym where Eliza had performed her last talent show. The trees along Maple Avenue grew taller, their roots buckling the sidewalk where her footprints once danced. The church began losing members. Father Connolly retired, replaced by a younger pastor who tried to bring in modern programs, yoga, book clubs, youth choir. But something about the building still felt heavy, like it held its breath every time someone walked down its older halls. The East Prayer Room, where the glove would one day be found, was used less and less. It was small, unheated. The stained glass windows hadn't opened properly in years. Most people preferred the main sanctuary, but Marie remembered that room. It had been Eliza's favorite. She'd once told her mum that the light through those particular windows looked like candy colors, red and yellow and blue, mixing into warm pools on the dusty stone floor. She liked to sit there during choir practice, tracing patterns with her boot. Marie had tried not to think about that too much. One day, during the 8th year, a traveling reporter came through town. She was working on a book about unsolved disappearances in small communities. She visited St. Mary's, walked the trail behind it, and even spoke to Marie for an hour on the record. It was the first time in years anyone had written about Eliza in print. When the article came out, people noticed. For a week or two, the case became a conversation again, albeit quietly. One of the volunteers from the original search team sent Marie a card. A few folks came forward with second-hand stories, most of them unreliable. One woman claimed she'd seen a man in a grey hoodie walking out from the church alley that day, but her description was too vague. No one had ever reported a grey hoodie. Still, Marie clipped the article and placed it in Eliza's memory box. Maybe it would matter someday. In the 10th year, the town finally approved the long-postponed renovation of St. Mary's interior. The East Wing had sustained water damage. Plaster was crumbling, and parts of the floor were warped from years of cold and condensation. The crew brought in to handle repairs was local. 2 brothers, a carpenter from Greenville and a project supervisor named Rick, who'd grown up in Winfield but hadn't stepped foot inside the church in over 20 years. They started with the prayer rooms. The East Room was last on the list, and on the second Tuesday in February, after prying loose the corner panel near the baseboard under the center window, Rick called out for a flashlight, and that's when they saw it. Beneath dust, crumbled paper, and a few scattered leaves that had likely blown in through a crack in the old stone was something bright and heartbreakingly small. A single glove, rainbow-striped, faded, but unmistakable. It had been there for years, folded in on itself, tucked into a pocket of shadow where no one had looked. Rick froze. One of the brothers, Joel, bent down, picked it up gently. "Is this—" "I think it's hers," Rick said quietly. They called the police. The glove was bagged, catalogued, tested. DNA confirmed it belonged to Eliza Monroe. 11 years after she vanished, the smallest piece of her had come home, and for the first time in over a decade, the silence cracked. But the truth, the real truth, was still buried deeper than anyone imagined. The day the glove was confirmed as Eliza's, Marie didn't cry, not immediately. She stared at the envelope when the officer handed it to her. A thin, cream-colored folder with a single page of lab results and a typed summary at the bottom. It said what she already knew in her heart. The fibers The DNA swab on the inner cuff, even the trace skin cells buried in the wool, all matched Eliza. It was hers. The glove she'd spent 11 years picturing in every corner of town, every sidewalk crack and gutter drain, had been right there all along, inside the very church she once skipped toward, with her backpack bouncing and her boots squeaking against the bricks. Marie took the envelope, nodded, and went back inside. Then she locked the bathroom door and sat on the cold tile floor until her legs went numb. Because a small part of her, the part she had shoved down so deep it stopped speaking years ago, knew exactly what this meant. Eliza hadn't been taken far. She hadn't been dragged out of town or lured into a stranger's car or vanished into some dark, impossible distance. She had never left Winfield. News of the glove spread slowly. The town didn't rush to reopen wounds, not publicly anyway. Most people whispered their thoughts in parking lots, in kitchens behind closed blinds, and over coffee with old friends they hadn't spoken to since the early search days. Some felt guilty. Some claimed they'd always believed she'd been nearby. A few said it was just a glove. Maybe it had been dropped there by someone else, passed along, planted even. But Marie knew better. Eliza would never have taken off that glove, never left it behind unless something or someone made her. The discovery reignited the investigation, in name if not in true effort. A new detective was assigned, a woman named Hannah Keene, who had just transferred from a bigger department in Wexford County. She was younger than Marie expected, sharp, no nonsense, and not particularly warm. But she listened, took notes, brought in a new team to scan the church for any other hidden compartments. They found nothing. No blood, no prints, no footprints. No other personal items, just dust and wood and old echoes. Keene tried re-interviewing key witnesses from the original case. Paige, now living in Chicago, came back for a weekend to speak with her. She remembered Eliza's coat, her smile, the way they'd joked about hiding snacks in the hymnals, but she couldn't recall anything unusual from that morning, just that Eliza had promised to meet her outside the church after service and never showed. Then came the neighbors, volunteers, staff, and of course family. Keene met with Marie for 3 long sessions, and she spoke to Darren. Darren was the same as always, quiet, helpful, grounded, and routine. He told the detective what he'd told everyone back then. He hadn't been at the church that morning. He'd worked a double shift at the mill and only heard about Eliza going missing when he got off late that afternoon. There was no reason to doubt him. Time cards backed it up. He hadn't even been near St. Mary's. Keene noted it, thanked him, and moved on. For Marie, life became split all over again, before the glove and after. She couldn't sleep. Her dreams filled with images she hadn't asked for. Eliza calling out. From behind the stained glass, footsteps behind her in the church hallway, a voice she couldn't identify, saying she didn't scream right away. She began sorting through Eliza's things for the first time in years. Not to clean out, she could never bring herself to do that, but to search. Maybe something had been missed. Maybe her daughter had left a clue she hadn't noticed. Inside a shoebox under the bed, tucked behind old drawings and school ribbons, she found a folded piece of paper. It was a thank you note written in Eliza's handwriting, addressed to Uncle Darren. She stared at the paper for a long time. It wasn't unusual. Eliza had written thank you notes often, something Marie had taught her early on, but something about this one caught her eye. There was a small detail in the corner, a hand-drawn church, childlike and crooked, but clearly meant to be St. Mary's, and next to it a stick figure with a yellow coat and a red hat. Marie ran her finger over the drawing. The figure next to Eliza's sketch had no name, just a tall body and a grey scribble for hair. It was standing behind her, not beside her. Behind. It probably meant nothing, but the feeling it left behind clung like frost. Later that week, Keene visited again. She brought photos, church blueprints, angles of the room where the glove was found, and old maps of the building's earlier design. She laid them out across the Monroe kitchen table, asking Marie if any of the old structural changes might seem significant. Marie stared at one blueprint in particular. "This wall," she said, pointing to the east end of the room. "It wasn't always there." Keane blinked. "What do you mean?" "I mean it used to open further. There was a closet or maybe a built-in cabinet. I don't remember exactly, but Eliza liked it, used to hide in there with her Sunday school crayons." Keane nodded slowly. "Could anyone have locked it up, covered it over?" Marie shrugged. "That renovation was long before the disappearance. Might have been when Darren helped out." Her voice trailed off. Keane didn't press. She simply circled the wall on the blueprint and folded the paper back into her case. 2 days later, a second item was found. A carpenter working in the crawl space beneath the main sanctuary, lifted an old tile and found something thin, buried beneath years of dust. A button, a small, shiny, heart-shaped button, the exact kind sewn onto Eliza's yellow coat. It was catalogued, photographed and matched to a duplicate, still hanging on the coat at home. This time, Marie didn't wait for the report. She knew her daughter had been inside that building, had moved, at least for a time, through those walls, and whoever had been with her had known the space well. Meanwhile, Darren came by as usual. He brought soup that Sunday, potato and leek, said he'd found a new recipe in a newspaper clipping someone left in the break room. He handed it to Marie, like nothing had changed, asked how she was holding up, mentioned how sad it was that the glove turned up after all this time. Marie watched him, searched his face for something, anything that looked out of place, but he was Darren. Same steady voice, same tired smile, same frayed coat sleeves he never bothered replacing. And when he reached for the coat hook by the door, he paused. His hand brushed against Eliza's coat, still hanging there after all these years. "Still can't believe it," he said softly. "She looked so small in this. Can't imagine how cold she must have been." Then he turned, smiled at Marie, and walked out the door. Marie didn't move for a long time. The soup cooled on the counter. Outside, the wind picked up, and inside her chest, something stirred. Old, quiet, but no longer dormant. Not yet suspicion. Not yet, but something that would not sleep again. Detective Keane began mapping everything. She brought in digital analysts, scanned the church floor to ceiling with ground-penetrating radar, even asked a retired architect who'd worked on the building in the late 80s to walk through and point out inconsistencies. A few areas stood out, especially near the East Prayer Room, where a strange air pocket was detected beneath a corner platform. But the radar couldn't penetrate thick stone, and excavation wasn't authorized yet. The church board was reluctant. They didn't want bad press, not more than they already had. But Keane persisted. So did Marie. She started walking to the church every morning. Not to pray, not exactly, but to sit on the steps, thermos in hand, eyes on the bricks, sometimes whispering to herself, sometimes not whispering at all. She was no longer the quiet mother on the edge of town. She was a woman who had waited 11 winters and finally found a door beginning to open. She was not going to let it close again. Meanwhile, a local podcast picked up the story, not just the glove, but the whole case. Eliza's disappearance, the frozen silence that followed, the resurfacing of forgotten details. It was called Under Our Roofs. Episode 3 included something unexpected. A caller, an anonymous voice altered for privacy, claimed they had once seen a man who worked maintenance at the church around the east side door just before Eliza disappeared. The podcast hosts speculated, as podcast hosts do, tossing out half-baked theories and dramatic music beds. But Marie listened anyway, every episode twice. She didn't say anything to Keane at first. She didn't need to. The detective had already heard it and noted the statement quietly in her file. That week, Marie cleaned Eliza's old desk. The surface was still covered in stickers, unicorns, stars, a peeling heart with faded letters spelling hope. She hadn't touched the drawers in years. But now, driven by something she couldn't name, she opened them one by one. Most were empty, but the bottom drawer, the one with the purple tape handle, had something inside. An envelope, not addressed, not stamped, just sealed. She opened it slowly. Inside were 3 photos. The first was of Eliza and Paige at the church. Picnic, smiling, sitting on the grass, Eliza's glove clearly visible on her left hand, bright and clean and whole. The second was a blurry shot of Eliza walking, alone, taken from behind. Marie had never seen this one before. It felt off, like it was taken without permission. The third photo was of the church itself, taken at night from a distance, grainy and dark. There was no note, just a folded paper behind the photos, a child's drawing, 2 stick figures inside a big box. One figure had X's for eyes. Marie's breath caught in her throat. She placed the envelope on the table and sat down, the room spinning. Who took these? When? And why were they hidden? She called Keene. Within an hour, the detective was at the house, gloves on, gently bagging the contents. She didn't say much. She didn't need to. The implications were loud enough. "Do you recognize the handwriting?" she asked. Marie hesitated. "It's hers, Eliza's, you're sure?" She used to draw X-eyes when she played monster games, said it meant they lost. Keene nodded. "And these photos?" Marie shook her head. "No idea. I never took them. Eliza didn't have a camera. Anyone close to her who did?" "No, not that I know of." Keene paused. "Did Darren ever have a camera?" Marie blinked. "Not that I remember." "Why?" "No reason. Just trying to eliminate possibilities." The next day, Darren stopped by again. He didn't knock. He rarely did. Just let himself in with the spare key they never bothered to hide. He set a grocery bag on the counter, pulled out eggs, butter, and the coffee creamer Marie liked, then turned and smiled. "You okay?" Marie nodded. "Yeah." He studied her for a moment. "You sure?" She looked at him, really looked. Not just at his face, but at the way he shifted his feet, the way he kept his hands in his pockets, the way his voice carried a different edge now, tighter. "I found something," she said softly. His eyes narrowed, just slightly. "What kind of something?" "In Eliza's desk, photos, old ones of her." She watched him carefully. He didn't blink. "Photos," he said. "From when?" "I don't know. Maybe around the time she went missing." A beat. Then he shrugged. "Probably old school shots. You know how kids save stuff." "Maybe." A long silence followed. He picked up the creamer again. "This was on sale, 2 for 1. Thought I'd grab an extra." She nodded. "Thanks." Later, after he left, she called Keene again. "I think he knew," Marie whispered. "Not what happened, but something." Keene's voice remained steady. "We're looking into him." "You are?" "Yes." Marie exhaled. She hadn't realized she'd been holding her breath. That night, Keene reviewed the file again. Darren's alibi was clean. Time cards matched. But there was a gap, a 15-minute window between his first checkout and when he returned, claiming he forgot. His lunch. It hadn't seemed significant at the time. Now she marked it, then called the mill. The supervisor who answered remembered Darren, said he'd always been quiet, punctual, respectful. But yes, he vaguely recalled the lunch thing. Said Darren looked off that day, didn't elaborate, said he didn't want to get involved. Meanwhile, inside the church, another search was underway, this time behind the wall Marie had pointed out, the one she said used to be a storage closet. Contractors removed the plaster carefully, and there, behind decades of dust and insulation, was a hidden cavity, barely big enough for a small child to crouch inside. It had no door, no latch, just a small space walled in by wood. And on the back panel, a single handprint, faded, But there, small, too small to be anyone but Eliza's. The handprint was Eliza's. Marie didn't need forensics to tell her. She knew it, like she knew the curve of her daughter's smile, the way she'd press her hand against the kitchen window on frosty mornings and watch it fog around her fingertips. The print behind the church wall was slightly smudged, old but unmistakable. It was like she had tried to say, "I was here." Keane photographed it, of course, bagged a few wood chips, took samples, ran luminol. Nothing came up, no blood, no fluid traces, no hair, just a handprint and silence. But for Marie, it was louder than anything she'd heard in years. The next few days passed like fog. Marie drifted from room to room, forgetting where she was headed or what she'd meant to do. She put water on for tea and walk away before it boiled. She turned the television on, only to stare blankly through the screen. Everywhere she looked, memories threaded through the walls. The hallway, where Eliza once skipped, twirling like the world was hers. The couch, where she fell asleep watching cartoons with Darren one snowy Sunday afternoon. That memory kept coming, back uninvited. The way Darren had wrapped a blanket around Eliza, tugged it up to her chin, then quietly watched her sleep. Marie had thought it sweet back then, tender. Now, she wasn't sure what she thought. Detective Keane returned with a new request. "Can we check your basement?" she asked gently, just to be thorough. Marie nodded. It wasn't suspicion. Not yet. It was pattern recognition, quiet logic. Eliza had been close, maybe never far at all, so every possible space, no matter how innocent, had to be re-evaluated. The basement revealed nothing. Dust, old boxes, a collapsed ironing board, one of Eliza's childhood tricycles, missing a handlebar, but no glove, no hair, no trace. Keane marked it off and moved on. That night, Marie had a dream. Eliza stood in the church hallway, one hand against the glass. She was smaller than Marie remembered, not 12, but maybe 6, wearing the yellow coat and one glove. The other hand was bare, pressed to the stained glass pane. She didn't speak, just looked at her mother. And then the glass turned black. Marie woke up gasping. The next morning she called Darren, asked if he'd come by. He did, within the hour. Same denim jacket, same neutral smile, but something in his eyes had changed. It was subtle, but Marie felt it. Maybe it was just her, maybe not. She poured them both coffee. Darren sat at the table, glancing at the calendar pinned beside the fridge. 11 years, he said softly. Marie said nothing. He sipped his coffee. You remember that winter before she disappeared? The one where the pipes froze in the kitchen. She tried to melt the ice with a hairdryer. Marie managed a laugh. She soaked herself more than the pipe. She got so mad. Darren smiled. Said she was solving the problem with heat science. God, she was funny. They sat in silence for a moment. Then Marie said, without looking up, You ever go back to the church these days? Darren was still for just a beat too long. Not really, he replied. Too many memories. She nodded. They're opening old rooms, digging things up. He looked at her now. I know. The next day, Keane received a call from the old church caretaker, Mr. Edling. He'd worked part-time during Eliza's disappearance and had long since retired. But hearing about the glove on the news had stirred something. He remembered vaguely someone coming in after hours one night, a man he recognized but couldn't quite place, asking for access to the back storage area. Said he needed to grab something, left behind. He hadn't thought much of it until now. Was it Darren Monroe? Keane asked. I don't know, Edling stammered. Could have been. He helped around sometimes. He wasn't in uniform. Do you remember the date? No, but it was after the girl went missing, maybe a few days. That was enough. Keane placed Darren's name back at the top of her private suspect list. Still no evidence, still no direct link, but too many questions. Marie began writing again, not in a journal. that had stopped years ago. She began writing letters to Eliza. She wrote about the snow, about the flowers in the neighbor's yard, about the way the kitchen still smelled like cinnamon if she used the old toaster. She wrote as if her daughter might still read them, and she kept them in a box beneath her bed. She told no one, not even Keene. Then came the second discovery. During renovation in the bell tower, a part of the church rarely accessed except for seasonal decoration, workers found a cloth bundle stuffed deep into a wall crevice behind a rusted maintenance panel. Inside were a faded church bulletin from the week Eliza vanished, a cracked pair of sunglasses, a small heart-shaped locket, and a single page from a children's prayer book with Eliza's name written in pencil on the back. It was a fragment of her, a time capsule sealed in silence. The locket contained a photo, Eliza on one side, on the other a man's face had been ripped out. Only the shoulder and a piece of a jacket remained. Marie held it in her hands later that night, turning it slowly again and again. The denim, the fray at the seam. It looked familiar. Marie didn't sleep that night. The denim in the photo haunted her, not because she was certain she wasn't, but because uncertainty had become its own kind of terror. She couldn't trust her instincts anymore. For years, she had protected her memories like glass, kept them intact, clean, undisturbed. But now, each recollection came with questions. Had she missed something? Had she overlooked Darren? Had love blinded her? She sat in Eliza's room again. The posters on the wall had curled at the edges. The stuffed animals still sat on the bed, quietly fading. She hadn't moved them in over a decade. That morning she did, not out of intention, but reflex. She lifted the teddy bear from the pillow and tucked it into the box at her feet, the one she'd labeled Hope Chest back in 2012. It felt like closing a door, but she couldn't yet close the one she feared most. Detective Keene had the photo analyzed. There wasn't much to work with, just the shoulder, the partial sleeve, the hint of a collar. But with the right filters, contrast adjustments, and pattern recognition software, one small detail emerged. A faded patch above the pocket, too blurred to read, but clearly present. Keene began digging through employment records, volunteer rosters, any possible image from that year showing Darren in his work jacket. It was less police work and more emotional archaeology. Slow, frustrating, and without guarantees. She found an old photo taken at a church fundraiser. Darren holding a box of hymnals, smiling slightly beside a folding table. Same jacket, same frayed edge, same patch. Still, Keene couldn't act, not officially. It was circumstantial. She needed something more, something definitive. So she went back to Marie, sat across from her on the porch, spring wind tugging gently at the edges of Marie's sweater. "There's something I need to ask," Keene said softly. "And it's going to hurt." Marie nodded, her hands already trembling. "Has Darren ever made you uncomfortable?" She didn't answer immediately, not because she didn't know, but because saying anything out loud felt like betrayal, like dropping a match in a dry forest. Finally, she whispered, "He was always kind to me, but sometimes I'd catch him watching her, Eliza." Marie nodded. Nothing inappropriate, not that I could say, but it didn't feel... Keene was quiet, then asked, "Would you be willing to wear a wire?" Marie blinked. "What?" "Just to talk naturally, see if he says anything." The air between them grew dense. Finally, Marie exhaled. "Yes." The next Sunday, Darren came by as usual. Same bag of groceries, same light knock. Marie let him in, her voice steady. The recorder was hidden beneath her cardigan, clipped carefully out of sight. Keene sat 3 blocks away in an unmarked car, headphones on, heart racing. Darren placed the bag on the counter. "Brought you those granola bars you like." "Thank you." He moved to the living room, sat in his usual chair. Marie stayed standing. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Sure." "That week when Eliza disappeared, you never went near the church?" He looked up, slightly confused. "No," I told the police I was at work. Even after. You never stopped by. He hesitated, then shrugged. Maybe once, dropped off a heater for the choir room. Marie's breath caught. You didn't tell them that. He frowned. Didn't think it mattered. Marie moved closer. Why were you there after hours? He shifted in his seat. What's this about? Marie, she swallowed. That locket they found, one side was torn, the other was Eliza. Darren's eyes darkened. You think I put it there? Marie didn't respond. Darren stood slowly. I would never hurt her. She stepped back. I loved that kid. I was the only one, showing up here every week while the rest of this town forgot she existed. He walked toward the door, then paused, turned. She trusted me, he said. You did too. Don't forget that. And then he left. The recording was reviewed. Clean, too. Clean. He hadn't confessed, hadn't slipped, hadn't even stammered. But something in his voice, the chill in it, the edge, Keane knew what it meant. She filed a formal request to search Darren's home. It was denied. No cause, no warrant, no concrete link, just inference, emotion. And that wasn't enough. So Marie acted on her own. The next morning she showed up at Darren's unannounced. I was thinking about Mom, she said. Wanted to see if you still had her old jewelry box. He didn't question it. Let her in. They walked past the den, through the hallway into the back bedroom, the one he kept locked. He fumbled with his keys, muttering something about misplacing them. Marie watched him, watched his hands shake, watched how long it took to find the right key. When the door finally opened, her breath caught. The room wasn't sinister, it was ordinary. But in the corner, on a shelf above old books and boxes, sat a small collection of framed photos. Family, Marie and Darren as kids, their mother, and Eliza. 3 different pictures, one from the picnic, one from Christmas, and one she had never seen, taken from a hallway in the church, dimly lit, Eliza's back to the camera. She was standing in front of the stained glass window in the East Prayer Room. The photo was dated February 12, 2012, the day she disappeared. Marie stood frozen. The photo was unmistakable. Eliza in her yellow coat, standing quietly in front of the very window where her glove had later been found. The image was dim, slightly, out of focus, clearly taken without her knowing. And Darren had kept it, framed it next to photos of their childhood, their mother, their family. Her knees weakened, but she kept her voice calm. I've never seen this one. Darren turned toward her, slow, deliberate. Found it in Mom's attic years ago, thought you had a copy. I don't. He didn't blink. Marie looked at the shelf again. When did you say you found it? Couple years back. But you didn't tell me. It didn't seem important. His tone was steady, flat, like he was reading off a weather report. Marie took a step back. The room felt smaller. She needed air. I should go, she said. You just got here. I remembered something I need to do. She turned, walked briskly to the door. Darren didn't follow, but as she pulled it closed behind her, she heard his voice from the hall, quiet, but not quiet enough. She trusted me, he said. Again, Marie didn't stop driving until she reached the police station. Keane was already in her office. She showed her the photo, the timestamp. He said he found it years ago, Marie said, but it couldn't have been before it was taken. That's the day she disappeared. Keane's eyes locked on the frame. You're sure this wasn't publicly released? I would have remembered. That's my daughter. That's the last photo of her alive. It was enough. Keane signed a request for emergency approval to execute a limited search of Darren's home. This time, it was granted. That evening, as the sun dipped low behind Winfield's cracked rooftops, a quiet convoy of unmarked vehicles parked along Maple Lane. Officers moved in without sirens, no announcements, just a soft knock and a badge against the glass. Darren opened the door, said nothing, didn't resist, didn't argue, just stepped aside like he'd been waiting for it. The search turned up more than anyone expected. Hidden beneath the floorboards in the back bedroom, officers found a sealed metal box. Inside were 3 undeveloped rolls of film, a torn corner of Eliza's drawing notebook, a broken necklace matching the locket found in the church, and a small piece of yellow fabric crusted with dirt. No blood, no weapon, but the implications were undeniable. Darren was brought in, questioned. He said little, then nothing, then asked for a lawyer. The town of Winfield once again became very small. Whispers turned to murmurs, murmurs to gossip, gossip to disbelief. Some refused to believe it, said Darren was shy, not sinister, said he'd done more for Marie than anyone. Others said they always had a strange feeling, that there was something about him they never quite understood. Marie didn't speak to reporters, didn't return calls. She sat in her daughter's room, holding the notebook page from the box, one that looked torn from a corner of Eliza's sketch pad. It had a single word written in red pencil: help. Darren's attorney refused comment, but under pressure he eventually spoke. "I didn't mean to hurt her," he said during a recorded interview. Keane leaned forward. "Then what did you mean to do?" Darren stared at the floor. She was scared, wouldn't stop crying. "I just wanted to keep her quiet." His voice cracked once, then steadied again. "I didn't want to lose the only person who still looked at me like I mattered." Marie sat across from him 1 week later. It wasn't part of the official process. She requested it, insisted. Keane advised against it, but she needed to know. Darren's hands were cuffed, resting on the cold table between them. He didn't speak first. She did. "Why?" He didn't look at her. "You were her uncle." Still nothing. Then, finally, "I didn't plan it." Marie's voice trembled. "Then what happened?" Darren exhaled. "She was upset that morning, said her mom didn't come to church, said she was cold. I found her outside the side door, crying." Marie's eyes welled, but she didn't blink. "I brought her inside just for a minute, just to warm her up." He paused. "I thought I was helping, and then she panicked, tried to leave. I stopped her." Tears ran down Marie's face. "You locked her in?" Darren nodded. "I was going to let her go, I swear. I waited too long." There was no trial, only a confession and sentencing. He accepted a plea deal to avoid public testimony. Second-degree manslaughter, unlawful imprisonment, tampering with evidence. He was sentenced to 24 years. Marie didn't attend the hearing. She didn't need to. She had already heard what mattered. The town quieted again, not in relief, not in joy, but in a deep, solemn stillness, the kind that settles into bones. St. Mary's sealed off the East Prayer Room permanently, replaced the windows with clear panes, built a small memorial in Eliza's name, her photo, her glove, and the words she once wrote in Sunday school etched into stone. "Be kind. Be safe. Be home before dark." In the weeks following Darren's confession, Marie's house was silent in a new way, not the silence of waiting, of dread, of absence, but the silence that follows a slammed door, the kind you sit inside, breathing, shallow, unsure if the world is still spinning outside your window. Eliza was gone, and now Marie knew why. She knew who. She knew how. But knowing didn't feel like closure. It felt like another wound. She took down the yellow coat, folded it for the last time, not because she was letting go, but because it had become something else, not just a memory, but a monument to everything that had unraveled. She didn't burn it, didn't bury it. She tucked it inside a cedar chest, alongside the letter Eliza had once written Darren, the photograph from the attic, and the prayer book page. The glove, returned to her by police, she placed on top. Then she closed the lid. Detective Keane stopped. By just once, after the sentencing. No questions, no case notes, just to check in. Marie offered tea, but they both knew the visit wasn't about refreshments. Keane sat across from her on the porch swing, spring sun warming the steps. "You were brave," she said softly. Marie shook her head. "No, I was desperate." Keene smiled. "Sometimes they're the same thing." They sat in silence, the birds arguing gently in the tree above them. Then Keene asked, "Do you want to know the rest?" Marie turned. "There's more?" Keene nodded. "We found more in his garage. There had been drawings, dozens of them. Not all were Eliza's. Some were from other children, likely collected from community events, church recitals, family gatherings. But Eliza's were the most intact. Her handwriting, her crooked son, her misspelled notes. Keene said they were preserved in plastic sleeves. He had kept them all this time carefully, meticulously. Marie couldn't bear to see them, but she asked for one, just one, to know it had returned to where it belonged. That week she reopened Eliza's room, cleaned the windows, freshened the sheets, set the drawing in a frame beside the bed. A simple sketch of a dog wearing a crown. She remembered the day Eliza drew it. They had been watching cartoons, and Eliza had insisted the family dog, Toby, was secret royalty. It made her smile, a real one, small, fragile, but real. The town moved forward. In its own way, the memorial at St. Mary's drew quiet visitors, a few each week, sometimes young women, sometimes older couples, sometimes someone left flowers. Once, a child left a pair of rainbow-striped mittens. Marie visited once a month, never on the date, never on anniversaries, just when it felt right. In early summer, Paige came back to visit. She was taller now, softer in voice, wiser in eyes. She hugged Marie long and tight and said, "I never stopped thinking about her." They sat on the porch together. Paige pulled out an old notebook she'd kept. Notes and doodles she and Eliza had, shared in Sunday school. She handed it to Marie. "I thought she should be home." Marie turned the pages slowly, stopping on one where Eliza had drawn the two of them in front of a big, smiling sun. Above it, in Eliza's handwriting, "Best friends forever, even if we're apart." Marie cried, not like she had before, not in rage or horror or grief, but in quiet recognition. Eliza was still hers. Not even time could take that. One morning in July, Marie walked the path from the church to her house, the same route Eliza would have taken that day. The trees had grown taller, the sidewalk had cracked, but the space between the church and the house still carried echoes. She didn't look for signs, wasn't tracing shadows. She was simply walking. She paused outside the alley, the shortcut Eliza had never used, then continued forward, slow, steady, at peace. For the first time in over a decade, the files were finally unsealed that September. By then, Marie had stopped asking for updates. She wasn't avoiding them. She was just tired. Tired of the forensic language, the dates, the reconstructions. Tired of thinking in timelines and evidence bags instead of memories and moments. But when Keene called, said the final interview transcript had cleared for public release, Marie asked for a printed copy. It arrived 2 days later in a thick manila envelope. She opened it slowly, like unfolding a wound. The final confession wasn't theatrical. It was mundane, stark, and all the more horrific for how plain it sounded on paper. According to Darren, that Sunday, February 12th, he had not gone straight to the mill, as he told police. He had stopped by St. Mary's to drop off a space heater, an excuse he later admitted. The real reason was more complicated. He'd been in a downward spiral, depression, loneliness, money trouble, feelings he never talked about, feelings he felt ashamed of, and then there was Eliza. She was light, he said. She brought something into the room that made everything quieter in my head. I didn't want to lose that. He never used the word obsessed, but that's what it was. He said he didn't plan to hurt her, that when he saw her alone that morning after Marie had stayed home with a headache, he invited her into the East Prayer Room to warm up. He'd been There early, supposedly checking a broken outlet. He said Eliza was fine at first, talkative even, but when she wanted to leave, he panicked, said something stupid, tried to keep her there longer. She started yelling, he said, kicking, she hit the wall hard. He said it wasn't intentional, but he didn't call for help. Instead, he panicked again, wrapped her in the coat, hid her in the cabinet space behind the false wall, a leftover from an old renovation he'd helped with a few years earlier. I thought maybe I could come back, fix it, undo it. But she never woke up, and so he sealed the panel, left through the side door, went to work late. The transcript noted he returned later that night, moved her body. He wouldn't say where, but evidence later found beneath the church crawl space. Bone fragments matched dental records, suggested he buried her near the foundation, then moved her again years later during construction work. The glove must have fallen out during the shift. He left it on purpose, he didn't say, but the most chilling part came near the end. When asked by a profiler why he never came forward, never even hinted at guilt in over a decade, Darren said this: "If she hadn't found the glove, no one would have looked again. I was almost free. Not remorseful, not haunted, just almost free." Marie dropped the transcript halfway through. It slid from her lap to the floor, pages spilling like dried leaves. She stared out the window for a long time. She didn't hate him. That surprised her most. She didn't forgive, but she didn't hate. Hate felt too sharp, too full of life. She felt something colder, more permanent, a distance. She wrote a letter that night to Eliza, the last one. She wrote about the confession, not the details, but the truth. She told her daughter she had been found, that her voice had been heard, that she was safe now in the way only truth can make you safe. She told her she was sorry, and she told her goodbye. The next morning, Marie walked to St. Mary's again. The wind was cooler now, early fall. She stepped inside the East Prayer Room, long since emptied. No benches, no stained glass, just quiet. She lit a single candle, set the letter on the stone floor, and whispered, "You're not forgotten." Then she left. A year passed. The seasons rolled over Winfield the way they always had, slow, familiar, indifferent. But for Marie, time moved differently now. It didn't rush, didn't stall, it just settled. She planted tulips that spring, yellow ones, not because they were Eliza's favorite, she'd always preferred purple, but because yellow felt like her, bright, unafraid, the color of raincoats and laughter and Sunday morning gloves. Every bloom was a heartbeat. Paige called often. Sometimes they talked about memories, sometimes they didn't talk at all, just stayed on the line, the silence between them saying what words couldn't. Marie didn't try to rebuild the past, she knew better. But she made peace with it. That was enough. One quiet morning she walked to the edge of the yard where the lilac bush bloomed and saw something odd tucked in its roots. A child's glove, bright, new, probably dropped by a neighbor's kid. She smiled, picked it up gently, and set it on the fence post, just in case someone came looking, because someone always does.